Welcome back, Life Sciences learners, to the next segment. In our previous segments, we've looked at the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and the atmosphere as components of the biosphere. We've also spent some time looking at what biomes were and the different biomes in South Africa. We discussed the aquatic biomes as well as the terrestrial biomes. In our next segment, we're going to be looking at ecosystems. It's important that we recognize that the biosphere is gradually broken up into smaller components, and that's essentially what we're looking at now. So we're going to look at the ecosystems and unpack what is an ecosystem, what are the components of an ecosystem, and how that supports the complexities of different forms of life. It's important that we understand what an ecosystem is. Eco refers to ecology, and systems refer to the interactions of organisms. An ecosystem is a specific area in a biome with characteristic vegetation in which there is a close interaction between the abiotic and the biotic components. So as I mentioned, let's try and understand what the ecosystem is. So within a biome, we find that there are several different ecosystems. Each ecosystem is characterized by several factors. It's characterized by the type of characteristic vegetation that is found, along with the type of organisms that are there. So your biomes are broad. Within biomes, we find ecosystems, and within ecosystems, we find that there are interactions between organisms as well as the abiotic factors. So abiotic factors are those factors in the environment that are said to be the non-living, so which include things like the temperature, the soil, the pH, the amount of light, altitude. We're going to unpack those in a little while. Ecosystems may vary in size as well as complexity. An example of this, it could be a freshwater pond. It could be a fallen, rotten log, a rock pool. So each of these form little areas where you have a unique diversity of interactions between the living and the non-living components. Yes, guys, a rotting log can be an ecosystem in that you would find bacteria, you would find many invertebrates, you would find some fungi that growing in there. So these are again a complexity of unique distribution of life forms in a specific area. The organisms in an ecosystem display adaptations for survival in that unique environment. It's also important that we recognize that in a biome, you have organisms adapted to living in those specific conditions. And that is what defines a biome. It's the ecosystems that have unique adaptations within them. There's a sustainable flow of energy through an ecosystem and the recycling of nutrients. So we need to understand that each of your ecosystems produce and recycle energy from that environment. And collectively, there's an interconnectedness between ecosystems. And we see that there's a flow of energy between ecosystems. And that is what we refer to as the complexities of ecosystems. So here's an image that shows you both, as I mentioned, you've got a log, and within that log, you've got specific interactions. You've got the aquatic parts of the environment, you've got the terrestrial parts of the environment. And all of these collectively interact with each other. So an ecosystem is a smaller component which has a variety of organisms interacting with them. As we look at ecosystems, it's important that we understand that there's an organization within ecosystems, and that organization is often linked to how the energy and the nutrients flow. If we were to look at this, we know that all forms of life on Earth rely on the radiation from the sun. So we have plants and we have aquatic organisms that are able to use that solar energy to produce chemical energy. Those producers in turn produce energy for other consumers. And so we have these consumers that feed off them. We've got secondary consumers that feed off. So we're seeing a complexity of energy flowing as we're seeing there's a complexity of nutrients flowing. And so there's energy that is produced, there's energy that is lost. And so that cycle of energy being converted and utilized between individuals in an ecosystem refers to the organization of an ecosystem. Remember that energy flows in an ecosystem. Along with that, there's an exchange of nutrients between the living and the non-living components. So as we started off, we mentioned that those were the biotic components. Let's try and understand what the abiotic components of an ecosystem are. As I mentioned, that the abiotic components are the non-living components, and these can be broadly classified into the climatic conditions, the edaphic conditions, and the physiographic conditions. What do I mean by that? Let's try and unpack that. So when we talk of our climatic factors, we refer to those factors that are aspects of the climate. So the light and the availability of light, the temperature of the environment, the type of water and the amount of water, so it could be fresh water, marine, the composition of atmospheric gases, as well as the velocity of wind in those areas. So these are the climatic factors, and all of these factors collectively can influence the diversity of life forms in an ecosystem. When we talk of the edaphic factors, we refer to those factors that are in the soil and all its properties. So the type of soil, we will discuss that, as in different types of soils support life forms. The water content in the soil, its ability to be able to hold water, along with the air available in the soil for the growth of plants as well as the sustaining of other life forms, the minerals in the soil as well as the pH of the soil. So these are the edaphic factors, or factors that are as a result of the type of soil and the amount of nutrients and pH of the soil. These in turn also influence the living forms. And finally, we have the physiographic factors, and the physiographic factors actually refer to the lay of the land. So when we talk about the lay of the land, we refer to the type of land, its situation in terms of geographically. So this is in context of the aspect. An aspect would be the amount of light that the area receives, the slope in terms of the terrain. So you find that it's mountainous, you have slopes that are facing the sun or away from the sun. So that refers to the slopes. And we also refer to the altitude. And the altitude is the height of an area above sea level. And collectively, all of these physiographic factors can influence the complexity of life in an ecosystem. So these factors have an effect on the distribution of the numbers and the types of organisms found in an area. So guys, as we wrap this segment up, we've looked at ecosystems and the components of the biotic and the abiotic factors. You deserve a short break. Have a little comfort break, and I'll see you back in a little while.